The galactic research station Zenith Prime floated in space, gleaming like an oversized jewel, a monument to the great minds of its time. Within its metallic halls, the brightest scholars in interstellar biology and anthropology spent their days cataloging, dissecting, and scrutinizing the species of the galaxy. Most importantly, though not in any official reports, they delighted in looking down their multifaceted eyes at the primitive species they studied. Dr. Talara's transparent gill flaps quivered with amusement as she spoke. Can you believe it? A species that evolved on a planet like that, with constant geological upheaval and unpredictable weather, thinking their reckless behavior is noble. The idea that running into danger is seen as a virtue. The others in the break room burst into a chorus of what could generously be called laughter, though it sounded more like a cacophony of screeching wind turbines. The room, adorned with holograms of the latest research subjects, showcased a rotating image of Earth. The planet spun slowly, dangerous features highlighted in red. Seismic activity, brutal storms, vast expanses of deadly water. Dr. Voss, the station's chief xenobiologist, extended his sensory tendril for a better look. His other appendages twitched with excitement as he leaned forward. "Did you know," he announced, his voice carrying the smugness of someone about to reveal a masterpiece of research, "they developed space travel while still in the midst of constant warfare? They hadn't even unified as a species when they started reaching out to the stars." The room erupted in wheezing laughter once more, and an eager junior scientist, freshly graduated from the prestigious Institute of Xenobiological Studies on New Aria, spluttered so hard that he nearly sent a spray of liquid flying across the table. "Clean yourself up," Voss ordered with a dismissive flick of a tendril, his eyes narrowing at the young researcher. "We are not primitives here." The implication made the others snicker again, a ripple of amusement passing through the room. The station's AI, with its perfectly calibrated voice and subtle hints of condescension, chimed in. "Reminder, the human diplomatic vessel will dock in approximately 3 cycles. All personnel are required to complete their sensitivity training modules." Talara's gill flaps flared in an expression of mock surprise. "As if we need to be sensitive to a species that thinks punching things is a legitimate conflict resolution method. Did you see the latest study? They actually release chemicals in their bodies when they exert themselves. They enjoy pain, Voss." He raised his tendrils in a universal sign of intellectual dominance. "Precisely. It's why their primitive responses to stress make them ideal subjects for our evolutionary regression projects. The Council has approved my proposal for an extended observational study." Excitement buzzed through the room. Long-term projects meant ample funding and guaranteed job security. The research had potential, even if the subject seemed like a bizarre curiosity. Talara smirked. "Imagine studying a race that considers falling from the sky a sport." Voss's tendrils twisted with barely contained glee. "Remember, when they arrive, maintain professional composure. Their behavior may be amusing, but we must save our real insights for the private research channels. That's where the true discussions happen, away from their primitive sensibilities." The team nodded knowingly. The private channels were the stage for candid observations, unfiltered by diplomacy or etiquette. As the other scientists filtered out, Voss lingered, staring at the holographic image of Earth. "So violent," he murmured to himself. "A planet torn apart by nature and its own inhabitants. Yet somehow they thrive, their aggression matching the very chaos they evolved within. How fortunate we are, in our orderly, stable worlds, to study such an oddity." These Deathworlders were nothing more than an amusing footnote, a puzzle that would cement Voss's reputation in the scientific community. His tendrils shivered with anticipation. What could possibly go wrong with a project studying a race that considers strong caffeinated beverages a vital food group? The AI's voice cut through the station once more. "Reminder, 2 cycles until human arrival. Ensure all containment protocols are up to date." Containment protocols. The idea was almost laughable, as if these highly evolved scholars needed to worry about primitive security measures. But regulations were regulations, even for beings who saw fermented grains as a means of leisure. Little did they know, These protocols would soon prove inadequate, not for containing the humans, but for protecting the station's residents from what was about to unfold. The docking procedures were carried out with more care than the scientists had anticipated. What harm could a single diplomatic vessel cause? The human craft, named Endurance, approached with a calculated precision that made Voss scoff. "Look at them," he whispered to Talara, "wasting fuel on trajectory adjustments as if our docking AI couldn't handle a minor course correction." The ship's exterior was practical, an unadorned display of purpose with armored plating that made Voss's tendrils twitch in disbelief. "Armor? For diplomacy?" he scoffed. "Are they expecting combat during peaceful negotiations?" Talara's gill flaps rippled in what the training modules called a gesture of superiority. "Deathworlder instincts, I'd say. They probably have armor for their sleeping chambers, too." The airlock cycle completed, and the station's welcoming committee assumed their ceremonial formation. Voss positioned himself at the center, exuding the perfect scholarly poise he was known for. The human delegation emerged, their protective suits clearly designed for agility, reinforced joints, and a sleek, battle-ready appearance. "Welcome to Zenith Prime," Voss announced through the universal translator, his voice dripping with practiced warmth. "We are honored by your participation in our evolutionary studies program." The lead human, a tall figure with striking facial hair, stepped forward. "Commander Callum Ward of the Endurance. Thank you for having us." He smiled, a grin that revealed far too many teeth. The station's security sensors blared, registering a sudden spike in threat levels. Voss forced his tendrils to remain steady. "Please, follow me to the orientation chamber," he said, noting how the humans scanned the room, eyes darting to potential exits and scanning the environment, survival instincts alive even in a secure setting. In the chamber, Voss laid out the research parameters, speaking with an exaggerated patience he hoped would be noted in his future publications. "We'll be conducting a series of observational studies, focusing on your species' unique adaptations to stress." "You mean you want to see what makes Deathworlders tick?" Ward said, his voice casual but with a steel edge, making Voss's tendrils stiffen in surprise. Talara's gill flaps twitched as she realized, too late, that this would not be a simple study. The humans, with their glances and grins, had already decided the researchers would be the subjects. And the real screaming had just begun. The first days of the human delegation's stay on Zenith Prime were filled with observations, questions, and cautious interactions. The scientists conducted their studies with the expected air of superiority, taking notes on the humans' reactions to the station's high-tech environment. Commander Callum Ward and his crew were cooperative, offering answers with careful restraint. The researchers' excitement grew, believing that these strange, brutal beings would validate their theories. But then the first incident occurred. Dr. Talara had arranged a controlled demonstration of the station's environmental stress simulations. It was a standard experiment designed to show how different species responded to simulated natural disasters. The simulation room was large, filled with holographic panels displaying shifting clouds and waves, an artificial rumble that mimicked an earthquake. For most species, the effect was mild, a heightened heartbeat or a sudden, shallow breath. The humans, however, reacted differently. Ward stood at the center of the room, watching the swirling vortex of stormy images with an unreadable expression. When the simulated tremor started, the crew shifted, some shifting their weight and placing their hands on their legs, others standing upright with a surprising stillness. The researchers observed, a mix of awe and disbelief playing across their faces. Then, without warning, Ward roared, a deep, primal sound that vibrated through the floor. The rest of the crew joined in, shouting, chanting, a chorus of guttural voices that carried an intensity the station had never heard. It wasn't just noise. It was as if the humans were challenging the simulation itself, daring it to test them. The holographic panels flickered, wavering in response to the force of their combined vocalizations, as if the storm were actually being driven back by the sound. The room's AI tried to shut down the program, but it was too late. The researchers, stunned, could only watch as the human sheer will seem to bend the simulation to their power. "Stop it!" Talara shouted, her gill flaps vibrating with alarm. The simulation is not meant to be resisted. Commander Ward's voice cut through the din, calm and unyielding. We don't bow to the storm. We face it, no matter how fierce. The simulation sputtered and died, and the room fell silent. The humans stood still for a moment, breathing heavy but resolute. The researchers, still in shock, exchanged nervous glances. The AI's voice returned, strained, its normally smooth tone faltering. Simulation complete. Energy consumption levels exceeded safe thresholds. Voss stepped forward, his tendrils quivering in a mix of exhilaration and fear. What was that? A show of strength? Ward met Voss's gaze, his eyes dark with something the scientists couldn't name. It's what we do. We survive. And we don't just survive. We conquer. The way he said it, with such finality, made Voss's tendrils stiffen in hesitation. Before the researchers could recover, another alert flashed on the station's control panels. A deep, resonant hum reverberated through the hall, accompanied by the station's AI calling out an alarm. Warning, external breach detected. Unknown life form approaching docking port 5. The scientists leaped to their feet, but it was Ward's crew that sprang into action, moving with synchronized precision. They didn't need to be told what to do. Ward's voice rang out, strong and commanding. Secure the breach point. Ready for anything. Dr. Talara felt a sudden chill run through her gills. What was it about these humans that sent a shiver down her spine? Their casual arrogance, their self-assurance, it was unnatural, almost supernatural. The AI's voice crackled over the intercom again, this time urgent. Security alert. Unknown entity detected. All personnel remain inside designated areas. The researchers scrambled, their initial shock giving way to a restless, nervous energy. But Ward and his crew didn't move to retreat. They moved forward. They were ready for combat. Dr. Voss's primary tendril twitched as he watched them march, and it struck him for the first time. He had underestimated them. They weren't just a curiosity. They were a force. Why would an unknown entity breach the station? Talara muttered, watching Ward's group move toward the docking bay. Perhaps they brought something with them, Voss said, more to himself than anyone else. Something we didn't anticipate. The chamber grew colder as tension thickened. Moments later, a series of heavy thuds and the harsh sound of metal bending filled the corridor. Ward and his crew burst back into the chamber, dragging behind them a struggling, fur-covered creature, its eyes wide with terror. The creature's limbs, splayed and clawed, thrashed as it emitted high-pitched screeches that echoed off the walls. A scout, Ward announced, a dark smile tugging at his lips. It's come to test us, but it will learn. We're not easy prey. Talara stared, mouth agape. This is not a part of the study. This is why we're here, Ward replied. His crew closed ranks behind him, eyes locked on the creature, hands poised and ready. To show you what we are and what we can do. The researchers stood frozen, staring at the creature as it twisted and screamed, the sound vibrating through their bones. Voss's tendrils twitched again, but this time it wasn't with excitement. It was with fear. The station's corridors, once filled with the hum of academic chatter, now resonated with an uneasy silence. The air crackled with tension, the usual gentle hum of Zenith Prime systems punctuated by the faint, dissonant wails of the creature still struggling in the orientation chamber. Dr. Talara stood stiffly, gill flaps raised, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Commander Ward and his crew formed a tight, purposeful circle around the creature, their eyes locked on its flailing limbs as it raked the air in a frenzy. They weren't afraid of it. There was no hesitance, no panic. If anything, they looked ready to pounce. Why is it here? Talara whispered to Dr. Voss, who stood beside her, eyes wide but focused. His tendrils were no longer twitching with curiosity. They had stiffened, rigid with concern. Ward's voice cut through the chatter in the room, firm and without hesitation. It came through the breach on docking port 5. The sensors picked up an anomaly, a breach by something we don't recognize. This thing is a scout, an advanced probe sent to assess. It's intelligent, but it's not alone. Talara's gill flaps spread wide, her heart pounding. "It's a threat?" she asked, half hoping the answer was no. "It's a warning," Ward said, his voice low. "Something bigger is coming." Voss's primary tendril curled, as if to protect itself. He had always believed their observations of the human species had only scratched the surface, but this was beyond any theoretical scenario he'd devised. The creature's eyes locked on him, and Voss gasped. It was as if it could see into him, as if it knew. A soft voice, cool and collected, sounded over the station's PA system. "All personnel are advised to move to secure quarters. External threat confirmed. Please remain calm and follow containment procedures." The researchers shifted nervously, glancing at one another with wide, alarmed eyes. The once familiar walls of Zenith Prime now seemed strange, almost menacing, as though the station itself were holding its breath. "Containment protocols are in place," Talara muttered, turning her attention to the humans. But they seemed different, unafraid. Commander Ward didn't take his eyes off the creature. His expression was a mix of concentration and intensity, but there was no trace of fear. He nodded to one of his crew members, a woman with eyes like polished steel and an expression that promised violence if provoked. She nodded back and stepped forward, her movements precise and fluid. "Enough," Ward said, his voice snapping like a whip. "We're not letting this thing become the story. We need to find out who sent it and why. Talara, Voss, are there any surveillance systems that could track what brought this thing to our door?" Talara swallowed, her gills fluttering anxiously. "There are camera arrays and motion sensors in the docking corridors, but they're only designed to detect ships. I don't know if they would catch an entity like this." "Then we need to get to them," Ward said. His voice hardened, eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "We need to understand what we're facing before it spreads." The air grew tense as the researchers exchanged uncertain looks. The humans, though, were already moving, their crew members coordinating silently as they prepared to leave the chamber. Talara and Voss watched, their minds racing. Voss was the first to speak. "We need to understand its physiology, what it feeds on, how it thinks. If this thing came from somewhere we haven't mapped, it could be dangerous. More dangerous than we know." Talara's voice shook slightly. "We'll need to send a research team to the docking area to examine the surveillance logs." Ward's eyes met hers, the weight of understanding passing between them. "That's where we'll start. If we can get ahead of this, we might just be able to keep it from becoming an infestation." The researchers were moving now, hastily gathering their data pads and securing what they could. But Ward's crew moved differently. They were already suited up, weapons holstered and poised, their movements slick and practiced, as though they had prepared for this moment long before it had arrived. Talara's fingers brushed her data pad as she considered the implications. These humans, they were more than they seemed. They were warriors, explorers, survivors. But more than that, they were unpredictable. And that unpredictability might be the only thing that kept them from being overrun. "Dr. Voss," Talara said, eyes still locked on the humans, "I think we're in over our heads." Voss's tendrils coiled in silent agreement, but there was something else in his expression, a flicker of recognition, the shadow of a thought that gnawed at him. The humans weren't here just to be studied. They were here because they knew something was coming, and they weren't going to wait for it to arrive. As Ward and his team moved out, the creature in the chamber ceased its thrashing and stared at them, its eyes now strangely calm. For a moment, there was no sound except for the whispered hum of the station's life support systems. Then, as the doors to the chamber hissed shut behind the humans, the creature opened its mouth and released a low, shuddering howl that seemed to echo through the entire station. In that moment, everyone knew. The true test had only just begun. The station's once predictable corridors had become a labyrinth of whispers, hurried footsteps, and the subtle, ever-present hum of anxious energy. Zenith Prime, a marvel of innovation and civilization, was now an outpost on the edge of panic. Dr. Talara's research station, so long dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, teetered on the precipice of chaos. The surveillance logs were being pored over by a team of junior researchers, their eyes flicking across the holographic screens in rapid succession. Voss stood beside them, his tendrils pressed tightly against his body, betraying the tightness in his chest. The log showed little beyond the usual activity of cargo ships and routine docking. But then, there it was. A flicker, a blip that didn't belong. It was an irregularity that had appeared just before the creature emerged from docking port 5. "Dr. Voss, look at this," said Ymera, a junior xenobiologist whose nervous energy rivaled that of the entire room. She tapped the console, and the footage expanded, revealing a shadow darting across the dimly lit corridors of docking port 5. It moved with purpose, swift and eerily silent. The recording showed only a few seconds of it, but that was enough. The creature in the orientation chamber was the same shape as the shadow, though far larger and more grotesque. "What is that?" Talara's voice cracked with a mixture of dread and disbelief as she approached the screen. "It's something that doesn't belong," Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned to the others, and his gaze hardened. "We need to get a better look at the exterior footage from that docking port. If there's a larger threat, we have to be prepared." A sharp, metallic bang echoed through the station. It came from the corridor behind them, a sound so loud and sudden that it made Talara jump. The lights flickered, and the AI's voice came on, tense and dissonant. "Attention! Breach detected in docking port 5. Intruder presence confirmed." The researchers exchanged looks of terror. Ward's team, who had been waiting in the next chamber, reacted instantly, springing into action. Commander Ward strode forward, eyes glinting with determination, and raised a hand to signal for silence. "Everyone get to the secure zones. Now," Ward ordered, voice hard as steel. His crew moved quickly, weapons drawn and ready. They didn't hesitate. Talara's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you expecting?" she called after Ward as he turned to lead his team down the corridor. Ward paused, his eyes locking with hers. "The unknown. But it's not just about survival anymore. It's about making sure it doesn't spread." The lights dimmed again, and a series of blaring alarms followed. Voss felt his tendrils twist in tight, anxious coils. "They're not just testing us. They're hunting." "System lockdown in progress," the AI announced, its voice tinged with static. "All non-essential personnel must vacate to secure quarters. Containment protocols engaged." The rest of the researchers backed away, hesitating only long enough to gather their gear before retreating down the hallways toward the emergency evacuation points. Talara hesitated, torn between following orders and staying to observe. A sharp hiss sounded behind them, and Ward's voice crackled over a comm channel. "Dr. Talara, get to safety. Now!" Before she could respond, the silence was shattered by a high-pitched, bone-chilling screech that resonated through the station like a force of nature. Voss shuddered, the noise pressing in on him, reverberating through his very cells. Talara could see it reflected in the wide eyes of the junior researchers and the tense postures of Ward's crew as they pressed forward, eyes forward and weapons ready. Ward's voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency. "We got company. It's moving fast, and it's not alone." The station seemed to shudder as if in response, the walls groaning and the floor vibrating beneath their feet. Talara's mind raced, her academic curiosity battling against the primal fear coursing through her veins. What had started as an observational study had become an existential struggle for survival. And in that moment, she realized Ward was right. The humans weren't just participants. They were the only ones who understood what was coming. The hallway ahead seemed to twist and stretch, shadows pooling and shifting. Talara glanced at Voss, his face contorted in concentration as he peered into the dark. "We need to go," he said, the words sharp and commanding. But before they could move, an explosion erupted from somewhere behind them. A dark shape burst through the ceiling panels, its limbs long and sinuous, with jagged, spiked appendages. Its eyes, small and glistening with malice, locked onto them as it let out another ear-splitting screech. The creature was here. Voss instinctively raised his arms, but it was Ward's crew that reacted first. The humans didn't hesitate. Ward threw himself between the creature and the researchers, raising a weapon that glistened with a bright, almost feral gleam. The rest of the crew opened fire, their weapons sending bursts of light slicing through the shadowy corridor. "Move!" Ward shouted, eyes blazing with fury and determination. The creature screamed again, and for the first time, Talara realized it was not alone. More shapes emerged from the darkness, their features indistinct but clearly hostile. In the sudden, dazzling light of combat, the researchers were thrust into a world they couldn't have imagined. The humans fought as if they were born to battle, unyielding and fierce, but even their tenacity was tested by the onslaught. As Talara sprinted toward the emergency evacuation, her eyes met Ward's one last time. He nodded once, but there was something in his expression, a silent plea, a warning. They had underestimated these Deathworlders, and now they were the only ones who stood between Zenith Prime and annihilation. The station's alarms roared again, but this time they were drowned out by the cacophony of battle, the screeching, the gunfire, and the human shouts that pierced through the chaos. It was only then that Talara understood. They had all laughed at Deathworlders, but now the screaming had started, and there would be no turning back. The station's corridors were a battlefield, an unforgiving maze of metal and flashing lights. Sparks and smoke erupted from walls and junctions where the creature had smashed through, its claws leaving deep gouges in the station's structural supports. Alarms wailed, a discordant melody that mixed with the growls and shrieks of the monsters that clawed their way through the halls. Talara stumbled, her legs barely holding her upright as she darted around a corner. The world seemed to blur in a cacophony of sound and movement. She could hear Commander Ward's voice, calm and authoritative even in the storm, shouting orders through the comms. "Secure the main containment gate." Ward's voice crackled, followed by the harsh reports of gunfire and the thud of what must have been another creature's body hitting the floor. The sounds were enough to make Talara's chest tighten. The humans were fighting, yes, but their numbers were dwindling. "Dr. Talara, this way." It was Voss, leading a group of researchers down a side corridor, eyes flicking nervously to the chaos behind them. His tendrils were stretched taut with anxiety. Talara caught his eye and gave a nod, but the look in his eyes was dark. There was something more pressing than just survival on his mind. She sprinted after him, the scent of smoke and metal biting at her senses. Ahead, the emergency doors opened with a hiss, revealing the secure quarters where other researchers were scrambling to find safety. The chamber was a fortress of reinforced alloys and energy shields that could withstand most assaults. But even here, a thin trickle of panic spread among the occupants. "They're coming," one researcher whispered, her voice breaking as she pointed to the shadows beyond the secure doors. The AI's voice, strained with urgency, spoke over the station's speakers. "Containment breach in Sector 5. Reinforcements deployed. Station integrity at 47%. "Talara." It was Ward's voice, harsh and punctuated with static. Talara turned back, and for a split second, her heart froze. A massive shadow loomed behind him, cutting through the dim red emergency lighting. It was a creature unlike the one in the chamber earlier, a grotesque amalgamation of sinew and bone, its eyes glittering with an intelligence that sent a cold wave of dread washing over her. "Get out of there!" Talara screamed, but it was too late. The creature surged forward with an unnatural speed, its claws slicing through the air. Ward's team reacted instantly, one of the crew members throwing herself between the monster and the rest, a flash of metal and pain as she raised her weapon and fired point-blank. The blast sent the creature sprawling, but only for a moment. Ward took a step back, pulling his injured crew member to safety as the creature's roar of rage echoed down the corridor. Talara's breath came in gasps as Voss pushed past her to reach the main console. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, desperate shadows. "We need to shut the main airlocks now," he shouted. "We can't let them breach containment completely." The AI responded immediately. Lockdown initiated in Sectors 5 and 6, locking off all entry and exit points. The station shook as if in response to the creature's fury. Talara pressed her back against the wall, her vision blurring with tears. She couldn't believe how quickly everything had unraveled. These creatures were more than just curious visitors. They were a scourge, an invasive force designed to rip through the core of civilization. And the humans were the only force standing between them and utter devastation. A shrill, bone-chilling screech came from the direction of the breach, and Talara knew it was close. She could almost feel its breath on her neck, a wave of putrid heat that spoke of something ancient and wrong. "Talara, move!" Voss screamed, snapping her out of her paralyzed state. She turned and ran with him, ducking under a fallen conduit as sparks showered over them. The researchers in the secure quarters were screaming now, some of them huddled together while others tried desperately to get data pads to work, searching for any way to help. A deep, resounding thud sounded from behind her as the creature smashed into the room where Ward's team was making their stand. Talara dared a glance back and caught sight of the lead human, his expression fierce but strained. Ward was struggling to reload his weapon, his eyes never leaving the oncoming threat. "Commander Ward," Talara called, but he couldn't hear her over the roar of gunfire and the screams. The creature burst through, its limbs like twisted tree branches, bent and writhing. One of the humans went down, a spray of blood painting the walls in a cruel testament to their struggle. Ward, even as he was driven backward, shot at the creature with unyielding focus, the air around him a blizzard of heat and light. Talara's mind screamed at her to move, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. She was frozen by horror, watching as the humans fought, their will to survive stronger than anything she'd ever witnessed. Ward's eyes met hers one last time, and she realized then, this was more than just survival. This was a fight for a future that none of them had prepared for. In that moment, the station shifted again, more violently than before. The creature howled as it was struck by another round of gunfire, but its strength did not falter. It lunged forward, taking Ward with it as the light dimmed and the echoes of battle were drowned in a deafening, inky darkness. A cold chill settled over the station as silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. The creature had retreated, but the damage was done. The station was no longer safe. It was an epicenter, an outpost on the front line, and the war had only just begun. Talara glanced at Voss, who now stood at the console, his eyes bright with an unsettling understanding. "This is bigger than we thought," he whispered, voice almost drowned out by the low, static hum of the AI. Talara nodded, fear spreading through her like ice. And somewhere in the depths of Zenith Prime, a message echoed silently through the void, waiting to be received. It was simple, brutal, and laced with a promise. We are coming. And you cannot run from what you have invited.